The fog rolled thick across San Francisco Bay that night, but not thick enough to hide the body. When Dex Rivers pulled a drowning woman from the frigid waters, he thought he was just saving another lost soul. He didn't know she was running from the most dangerous family in the city. He didn't know the corrupt cops were already searching for her, and he certainly didn't know that hiding her would put a target on his own back. But when she whispered those words in the shadows of his safe house, "Will you stay if I undress?" everything changed. It was the moment a cold-blooded enforcer made a choice that would either get them both killed or give them both a second chance at life. This is the story of a desperate widow, a hardened mobster, and how a single night of mercy became the one thing neither of them could escape, even with bullets flying and blood on their hands. What would you risk to protect someone who has nothing left to lose? Keep watching to find out. The bay was angry that October night, churning black as oil under a moonless sky. Dex Stone Rivers stood on the pier behind the old cannery, smoke curling from his cigarette as he waited for the shipment. The brass knuckles in his pocket felt heavy. He didn't like using them, but in his line of work, they were often necessary. A scream cut through the fog, thin, desperate. Nothing like the seagulls or foghorns that usually haunted these docks. Dex flicked his cigarette into the water and narrowed his eyes. Another cry, weaker this time. Then he saw it, pale fingers clutching the edge of a broken piling. A woman's body half submerged in the frigid bay, her dark hair plastered against white skin. Red lipstick smeared across her face like a wound. Dex shed his overcoat and holster in one fluid movement. He'd grown up swimming these waters when they were too poor for anything else. The cold hit him like a fist as he dove in, the salt burning his eyes, his expensive suit immediately ruined. The woman was sinking fast, her evening gown billowing around her like ink in water. Her hand was slippery in his, her eyes fluttering closed as he dragged her toward the ladder. Something metallic glinted around her ankle handcuffs, broken, but still dangling from one slender ankle. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to make sure she never came back up. On the pier, Dex pumped her chest until water spilled from her blue lips. She convulsed, coughing violently, then gasped for air. Her eyes flew open deep amber, like good whiskey, and locked onto his face with raw terror. "They'll come back," she choked out. "Please, don't let them find me." Headlights swept the entrance to the pier. Dex didn't hesitate. He wrapped her in his overcoat and lifted her into his arms. "Hold on," he ordered, voice rough from 15 years of cigarettes and whiskey. "Don't make a sound." He carried her through the shadows to his Cadillac, hidden behind the storage sheds. Her body trembled violently against his chest, but she didn't cry out, even when he had to shift her to open the car door. Her control impressed him. Most people in her situation would be hysterical. "Who are you running from?" he asked as the engine roared to life. "Everyone," she whispered. The woman passed out as they crossed the Golden Gate. Dex kept checking the rearview mirror, but no cars followed them into the hills of Marin County. The safe house sat 3 miles up a private road, a modern cabin with reinforced walls and a cellar full of supplies. Silver had given him the keys years ago, told him to use it when business got complicated. No one knew about it except Silver himself. Inside, Dex laid her on the leather couch and built a fire in the stone hearth. When the flames were crackling, he finally got a proper look at her. High cheekbones, full lips, expensive jewelry, or what was left of it. Someone had ripped a necklace from her throat, leaving raw abrasions. Her evening gown was torn at the shoulder, revealing a colorful bruise spreading beneath pale skin. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with visible effort. "Where am I?" "Somewhere safe," Dex replied, pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. "No one knows about this place." She tried to sit up, wincing. "I can't stay here. They'll kill you too." Dex placed a glass near her hand. "Drink. It'll warm you up." He turned away, stripping off his soaked shirt to wring it out by the fire. "I'm not exactly easy to kill, miss." "Blackwood," she supplied after a pause. Lorelei Blackwood. The name hit Dex like a bullet. Mason Blackwood's widow. Mason, who'd been found floating in the bay 3 weeks ago, allegedly for skimming from Reed Blackwood's gambling operations. Everyone in San Francisco's underworld knew that name. "You're a long way from North Beach, Mrs. Blackwood," Dex said carefully. Fear flashed across her face. "You know who I am. I know your husband's reputation." Dex kept his expression neutral. "I know his brothers better." She clutched the whiskey glass with both hands. "Then you know why I can't stay. The way I see it, you don't have a choice." Dex nodded toward the window where rain had begun to lash against the glass. "Storm's getting worse. Roads will be washed out by morning. You're stuck here for now." The cabin creaked and shuddered under the assault of the storm. Lorelei Blackwood sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire, her wet gown hanging from a chair nearby, steam rising from the expensive fabric. She wore Dex's spare shirt, the sleeves rolled up 4 times to fit her slender arms. Her face was washed clean now, revealing a split in her lower lip and a bruise high on her cheekbone. Dex moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking locks, drawing blinds, setting a pot of coffee on the stove. The routine was calming. He'd been in this business long enough to know that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford, especially now. "You're not just some fisherman, are you?" Lorelei asked, breaking the silence. Dex glanced at her. "No, Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not. You work for Sterling Knox." It wasn't a question. Dex's hand paused over the coffee pot. "What makes you say that?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "I recognized your face when the firelight hit it. You were at the Starlight Club last month, standing behind Silver while my husband groveled." The memory surfaced Mason Blackwood, sweating through his cheap suit, promising Silver he'd have the money by the following week. Dex had been there for show, a physical reminder of what happened to people who didn't pay. "I didn't catch your name that night," Lorelei continued, "but I remember thinking you looked almost bored, like you'd seen it all before." "Dex Rivers," he offered, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "Most people call me Stone. Because you're hard or cold?" A flash of defiance in those amber eyes. "Both." He sat across from her, the firelight carving deep shadows into his face. "What happened tonight, Mrs. Blackwood?" She stared into her coffee. "Reed happened. My brother-in-law. After Mason's death, he said I owed his family. That Mason's debts transferred to me." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "When I refused to pay in cash," he suggested. "Alternative arrangements." Dex's jaw tightened. He knew Reed Blackwood's reputation with women. "When I refused those too, he said I was stealing from him." She touched her bruised cheek absently. "Detective Chase was there. He put the handcuffs on me himself. Said I was under arrest for theft." "Warren Chase?" Dex asked sharply. She nodded. "They drove me to the pier. Reed said if I couldn't pay with money or other means, I'd pay with my life." The detective looked the other way while Reed's men. Her voice faltered. "You don't need to say it," Dex said quietly. "I fought back," she continued, determination hardening her voice. "Broke one man's nose with my elbow. While they were cursing, I managed to break the chain on the cuffs and jump. I thought the water might be better than what they had planned." Outside, thunder cracked so loudly the windows rattled. Lorelei flinched, spilling coffee onto her borrowed shirt. "You're safe here," Dex said, his voice low and firm. "The storm will keep everyone away for at least a day. Maybe longer. And then what?" The question hung between them. Silver Knox and Reed Blackwood are rivals. If Reed finds out one of Silver's men helped me, she shook her head, "you'd be signing your own death warrant." Dex stood and walked to the window, peering through a crack in the blinds at the darkness beyond. "Let me worry about that." The cabin had 2 bedrooms. Dex showed her to the smaller one, with its narrow bed and faded quilt. "Try to get some rest," he said, lingering at the door. "Bathroom's through there if you want to clean up." When she emerged from a hot shower, her hair damp and skin flushed, she found fresh clothes laid out on the bed, simple things. A sweater and slacks, probably left by some previous occupant. They were slightly too large but clean and dry. Dex had set up a makeshift bed on the couch, his gun within easy reach on the coffee table. He didn't look up when she entered the main room, just continued cleaning his weapon with methodical precision. "You should take the bed," she said. "I've already put you at enough risk." "I sleep better out here," he replied, not looking up. "Old habits." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm's fury and the snap of the fire. Lorelei hugged her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how alone they were miles from the city, from help, from witnesses. "Mr. Rivers," she said finally, her voice thin but determined. "I need to know what you want from me." Dex looked up then, his expression unreadable. "Want? For helping me," she clarified. "For the risk. What do you expect in return?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been disgust not at her, but at the world that had taught her this lesson. "Nothing," he said firmly. "I don't work that way." Lorelei's shoulders sagged slightly, but whether from relief or disbelief, Dex couldn't tell. "Everyone wants something," she said softly. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Blackwood," Dex replied, returning to his gun. Tomorrow will be complicated enough, but sleep didn't come easily to either of them. As the night deepened, Dex remained vigilant by the window, watching the storm tear at the trees, while Lorelei tossed in the unfamiliar bed, haunted by the memory of cold water filling her lungs and the faces of the men who had put her there. They were two strangers trapped by circumstance, a widow with nothing left to lose and a man who'd spent his life taking. The storm raged on, and somewhere in the city, men were already searching, their anger growing with every empty alley and deserted pier. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over the hills of Marin County. The storm had passed, leaving broken branches strewn across the muddy driveway and a leaden sky that promised more rain to come. Dex hadn't slept. The couch still bore the imprint of his body, but he'd spent most of the night by the window, watching the darkness for headlights that never came. Lorelei emerged from the bedroom shortly after 7, her borrowed clothes rumpled, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She paused in the doorway, watching Dex pour coffee into a chipped mug. "The roads are still flooded," he said without turning around. "I checked earlier. We're stuck here another day at least." She nodded, accepting the coffee he offered. Their fingers brushed, and she didn't flinch, a small victory in Dex's mind. He'd seen enough frightened women in his line of work to recognize the signs. The careful distance, the way her eyes tracked his movements, always calculating escape routes. "Are there phones here?" she asked, glancing around the cabin. "No phones, no radio." Dex leaned against the counter. "That's the point of a safe house." Something like despair flickered across her face. "So no one knows we're here?" "Just Silver. And he won't come looking unless I miss a scheduled check-in." Dex watched her over the rim of his mug. "But that gives us 3 days." 3 days, she repeated, the words hollow. "Do you think Reed will stop looking by then?" Dex didn't answer. They both knew the truth. Reed Blackwood wasn't the type to forget a slight, and a woman who'd escaped his justice was more than a slight. It was a challenge to his authority, his reputation. Men had died for less in their world. They settled into an uneasy rhythm as the day wore on. Dex found canned goods in the pantry, enough to last a week if necessary. Lorelei discovered a deck of cards in a drawer and laid out endless games of solitaire on the coffee table. The click of the cards and the occasional crackle of the fire were the only sounds for hours. "My father taught me to play poker when I was 8, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He was a card dealer at the Golden Gate Casino." Her fingers deftly shuffled the deck. "He always said knowing when to fold was more important than knowing when to bet." "Smart man," Dex commented, watching her hands move with practiced grace. "He died when I was 16. Mom followed 6 months later." A sad smile touched her lips. "That's when I met Mason. He was working security at the casino, always slipping me extra chips when the boss wasn't looking." "How long were you married?" Dex asked, surprised by his own curiosity. 7 years. The first 2 were good, the rest." She shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. "Mason changed when he started working for Reed. Gambling, drinking, coming home with blood on his shirts. He'd cry about it in the morning, swear he'd change, then do it all again the next night." Dex nodded. He'd seen it happen countless times, decent men corrupted by the easy money and power of the family business, until there was nothing left of their former selves. "What about you?" Lorelei asked, gathering the cards. "How does someone become Stone Rivers?" Dex's face hardened. "Same as anyone else. One bad decision at a time." Night fell again, bringing with it a creeping chill that the fire couldn't quite dispel. Dex added another log, watching the flames leap higher. Behind him, Lorelei stood at the window, the curtain pulled back just enough to reveal her profile against the glass. "I think I saw headlights," she said quietly. "Far down the road." Dex was beside her in an instant, his hand closing over hers to let the curtain fall back into place. "Stay away from the windows," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. He moved through the cabin with swift efficiency, checking locks, drawing blinds, extinguishing all but one small lamp. His gun appeared in his hand, and he checked the chamber with practiced movements. "What do we do?" Lorelei asked, her face pale in the dim light. "Could be nothing. Hunter, maybe, or someone who took a wrong turn." Dex didn't believe it, but the lie came easily. "Either way, we stay quiet and wait." Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Lorelei sat rigid on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dex stood by the door, listening for any sound beyond the normal creaks of the cabin settling. The distant rumble of an engine grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Too close for comfort, not close enough to be at their door. "Someone's watching the house," Dex whispered. "Stay here." He moved to the back of the cabin, to a small utility room with a high window. Standing on a crate, He could just see a portion of the road and the silhouette of a car parked among the trees, its lights now dark. When he returned to the living room, Lorelei was gone. Panic flared briefly until he spotted light spilling from beneath the bathroom door. He crossed to it in 3 strides and rapped his knuckles against the wood. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called softly. The door opened immediately. Lorelei stood there, her face washed, her hair combed back. She'd changed into a silk robe he didn't recognize, perhaps found in a closet. It clung to her figure in a way her borrowed clothes had not. "I thought," she began, then faltered. "Is someone out there? A car. About a quarter mile down. Could be coincidence." Dex knew better than to believe in coincidences in his line of work, but her fear was palpable. "Come away from the door. Stay in the center of the house, away from windows." She followed him back to the living room, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The robe whispered around her legs as she moved. Something had changed in her demeanor, a nervous energy, a decision made. "Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Dex." He turned to face her, instantly alert to the shift in her tone. "If they find us, you know what they'll do to both of us." Her eyes reflected the firelight, turning them to liquid gold. "You've risked everything for me. A stranger." "Mrs. Blackwood." "Lorelei," she corrected him. "Please." She took a step closer, the silk robe parting slightly to reveal a sliver of pale skin beneath. Her hand rose to the belt at her waist, hesitated, then untied it with deliberate slowness. "Will you stay?" she whispered. "If I undress?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Dex saw not just the offer, but the years of lessons that had taught her this was her only currency, her only protection. "No," he said, his voice rough but gentle. He reached out, not to touch her, but to retie the belt himself, his large hands careful and impersonal. "Not like this." Confusion flashed across her face, followed by a deeper emotion he couldn't name. "I don't understand," she said. "I know what you thought." Dex stepped back, giving her space. "But that's not why I helped you. That's not who I am." For a moment, she seemed suspended between relief and shame. Then her shoulders sagged, and a small, broken sound escaped her half-sob, half-laugh. "Get some sleep, Lorelei," Dex said quietly. "I'll keep watch." He turned away, moving back to his position by the window. Behind him, he heard her retreating footsteps, the soft click of the bedroom door. Outside, the car remained, a dark threat against the moonlit trees. Dex settled in for a long night, his gun cold in his hand, his thoughts anything but. Morning came with no sign of the mysterious car. Dex had dozed fitfully in the armchair, waking at every creak and whisper of wind. His neck ached, and 3 days of stubble darkened his jaw. He looked more like the enforcer he was than the gentleman he'd tried to be. Lorelei emerged from the bedroom late, her eyes red-rimmed but her chin held high. She'd abandoned the silk robe for her borrowed clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a simple knot. If she remembered last night's encounter, her face showed no sign of it. "The car is gone," Dex said, offering her coffee as if nothing had happened. She accepted the mug with a nod. "Do you think they'll be back?" "Probably. No point in lying to her now. But the storm's cleared. We should be able to get out of here by afternoon if the roads are passable." "And go where?" The question was blunt, practical. "Back to the city?" "Reed controls half the police force, and the ones he doesn't control are too scared to cross him." Dex considered this. "Silver has connections, people who can help. Maybe get you out of California altogether." Hope flickered briefly in her eyes, then dimmed. "Why would Sterling Knox help Mason Blackwood's widow?" "Because I'll ask him to," Dex said simply. Lorelei studied him over her coffee cup. "You have that kind of pull with him?" "I've worked for Silver for 15 years, never asked for anything." A ghost of a smile crossed Dex's face. "Figure he owes me one favor." The confession seemed to surprise her. 15 years, she repeated. "That's a long time in your line of work. Started when I was 22, fresh out of Korea with nothing but nightmares and a dishonorable discharge." Dex hadn't meant to share so much, but something about her direct gaze made the truth come easily. "Silver found me in a bar fight. Said he could use a man who wasn't afraid to bleed." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You were a soldier, for a while, until I wasn't." Dex turned away, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "We need supplies. There's a small general store about 5 miles from here. I'll go when it's safer." But Lorelei wasn't ready to let the conversation drop. "Is that why you helped me? Some kind of soldier's code?" Dex didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low and measured. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Mrs. Blackwood, things that don't wash off no matter how hard you scrub. But I've never hurt a woman, never stood by while someone else did either." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Lorelei nodded slowly, accepting his words without judgment. "I can cook," she said abruptly, changing the subject. "If you have ingredients." The simple offer broke the tension. Dex showed her the small pantry with its canned goods and dry staples. While she explored the kitchen, he checked the perimeter of the cabin, scanning the trees and the muddy road for any sign of watchers. The day was clear, the sun burning off the last of the storm clouds, but Dex couldn't shake the feeling that their time was running out. By noon, a strange domesticity had settled over the cabin. Lorelei had found flour and lard, and the smell of fresh biscuits filled the small space. Dex cleaned his gun at the table, the parts laid out in precise order, his movements methodical and practiced. "My father had a revolver," Lorelei commented, watching his hands move over the weapon. "Kept it in a cigar box under his bed. I was more afraid of that box than of any customer at the casino." "Smart girl," Dex replied, reassembling the gun with practiced efficiency. "Guns aren't toys. Will you teach me how to use it?" The question was casual, but her eyes were serious. Dex paused, considering. "Why?" "Because next time I might not have someone to pull me out of the bay." She set a plate of biscuits on the table with a quiet determination. "Because I'm tired of being afraid." Something like respect flickered in Dex's eyes. He nodded once, then reached for his holster. First rule, always assume it's loaded. For the next hour, he showed her how to hold the gun, how to check the chamber, how to aim. Her hands were steady, her focus intense. She was a quick learner, absorbing his instructions with the same careful attention she'd given to shuffling cards. "You've got good instincts," he said as she handed the gun back to him. "But let's hope you never need to use them." "Hope hasn't gotten me very far," Lorelei replied with a wry smile. "I prefer preparation." As afternoon faded into evening, Dex decided the roads were clear enough to risk a supply run. "I'll be back in an hour," he told her, checking his watch. "Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone but me." Lorelei nodded, her face composed but her eyes betraying her anxiety. "Be careful." The drive to the general store was uneventful, the roads still muddy but passable. Dex kept one eye on his rearview mirror the entire time, watching for tails. The store was nearly empty, just an old man behind the counter and a local woman buying cigarettes. Dex filled a basket with necessities: bread, eggs, coffee, cigarettes for himself. The normalcy of the task was almost surreal after the tension of the past 2 days. It was on the drive back that he spotted a black Cadillac parked at a turnout, facing the direction of the safe house. Dex drove past without slowing, his face impassive, but his mind racing. It could be coincidence. It could be tourists. It could be a dozen innocent explanations. But Dex Rivers hadn't survived 15 years in Silver Knox's employ by believing in coincidences. He took a longer route back, doubling back twice to ensure he wasn't followed. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had settled over the hills, painting the windows with golden light. Smoke curled from the chimney, and for a moment, the scene looked almost peaceful, a hunter's cabin at the end of a long day. Lorelei opened the door before he could knock, relief washing over her face. "You're late," she said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "Took the scenic route," Dex replied, carrying the supplies inside. He locked the door behind him and drew the blinds. "We need to talk." He told her about the Cadillac, watching her face pale as the implications sank in. "How did they find us?" she whispered. "Could be they're just searching the area. Could be someone talked." Dex's expression darkened. "Either way, we need to move. Tonight." Lorelei began gathering her few belongings with quick, efficient movements. No panic, no wasted emotion. Dex watched her with growing respect. She was tougher than she looked, this casino dealer's daughter. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice steady. Dex checked his gun one last time before holstering it. "I know a place in the city, one of Silver's properties that doesn't exist on paper. We'll be safe there until I can talk to him." As they prepared to leave, Lorelei paused by the fireplace, her hand resting on the mantel. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Dex nodded once, accepting her gratitude without words. They both knew what she was thanking him for, not just the rescue, but the respect, the choice, the dignity he'd given back to her when everyone else had tried to take it away. Outside, The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the velvet sky. They moved toward the car in silence, two shadows blending into the darkness. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, the fire dying to embers in the grate, the only witness to what had passed between them. The city looked different from the passenger seat of Dex's Cadillac, smaller, meaner, filled with shadows Lorelei had never noticed before. They crossed the Golden Gate just after midnight, fog rolling in thick columns across the bridge. San Francisco glittered below them, beautiful and treacherous as a knife's edge. Dex drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near his holster, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. They took a circuitous route through the city, doubling back and cutting through alleys until even Lorelei, who had lived in San Francisco her entire life, couldn't be sure where they were headed. "Are we being followed?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the engine. "Not anymore," Dex replied, making a sharp turn down a narrow street lined with warehouses. "But we can't be too careful." The property that didn't exist on paper turned out to be the top floor of a warehouse in the industrial district south of Market Street. Dex parked the Cadillac inside the loading bay and led her up a freight elevator that groaned in protest with every floor. "Silver uses this place to store shipments that don't go through customs," Dex explained as the elevator shuddered to a halt. "The top floor was converted years ago. It's comfortable enough." Comfortable was a generous description. The space was large but sparse, a studio apartment with mismatched furniture, bare pipes running along the ceiling, and windows that had been painted over, except for small, clear patches that offered strategic views of the street below. But it was clean and warm, and the refrigerator was stocked. A radio sat on a side table, and bookshelves lined one wall. Someone had even placed a vase of artificial flowers on the kitchen table, an incongruous touch of normalcy in the utilitarian space. "Bathrooms through there?" Dex said, nodding toward a door in the corner. "Water takes a while to get hot." Lorelei set her small bag down on the bed. "How long can we stay here?" "As long as we need to." Dex checked his watch. "I need to make contact with Silver. Let him know what's happening." "Will you tell him about me?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but Dex could hear the fear underneath. "I have to." His eyes met hers, steady and direct. "But Silver's not Reed. He doesn't hurt women to settle scores, especially not when they're under my protection." The last words hung between them, a declaration neither had expected. Lorelei nodded once, accepting his assurance with the same quiet dignity she'd shown at the cabin. "I'll be back in an hour," Dex said, moving toward the door. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." Alone in the warehouse apartment, Lorelei explored her new prison. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection: detective novels, history books, even a few volumes of poetry. The radio worked, though the reception was poor. The refrigerator contained enough food for several days. Someone had thought of everything, even a small closet with women's clothing in various sizes, tags still attached. The kind of place prepared for emergencies, for people who needed to disappear quickly. She wondered how many others had stood where she was standing, fugitives in this strange limbo, waiting for their fate to be decided by men in expensive suits. When Dex returned, his face was grim. He locked the door behind him and tossed his hat onto the table. "Silver knows we're here," he said, loosening his tie. "He's not happy about the situation, but he's giving us 72 hours before he makes any decisions." "Decisions about what?" Lorelei asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "About whether turning you over to Reed would be better for business." Dex's voice was flat, matter of fact. "Reed's put a price on your head, $10,000, and double that for anyone helping you." Lorelei sank into a chair, the magnitude of it hitting her like a physical blow. $20,000, she whispered. "For you. Seems I'm worth more dead than alive," Dex said with a grim smile. "But Silver's practical. He won't hand us over without hearing our side first." "Our side?" Lorelei looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You've aligned yourself with me now?" "I pulled you out of the bay," Dex replied simply. "That made my choice for me." The radio hummed quietly in the background, a jazz station playing something slow and melancholy. Outside, the city continued its nocturnal life, cars passing, occasional voices drifting up from the street below, the distant wail of a police siren. "There's more," Dex said after a moment. "Eddie Mercer's coming tomorrow. Silver's sending him to get a full account of what happened with Reed." "Eddie shadows Mercer?" Lorelei paled visibly. "Mason talked about him. Said he was Silver's information man." "That's one way to put it." Dex poured himself a drink from a bottle on the counter. Eddie knows things before they happen. Hears things no one else hears. If anyone can figure a way out of this mess, it's him. Or he could report back that we're more trouble than we're worth, Lorelai countered. Dex didn't disagree. Get some rest, he said instead. Tomorrow will be a long day. Eddie Mercer arrived just after noon, his thin frame casting an elongated shadow across the warehouse floor. He moved like his nickname, quiet, unassuming, easily overlooked until you noticed the intelligence in his pale eyes. Stone. He greeted Dex with a nod. His gaze slid to Lorelai, assessing her in a single glance. Mrs. Blackwood. Eddie. Dex gestured to the kitchen table. Coffee's fresh. Eddie sat, declining the offered cup. Whole city's looking for you two, he said without preamble. Reed's got his boys turning over every rock from here to Oakland. Detective Chase has your description on every patrol car's dashboard. How did they track us to the cabin? Dex asked, his voice controlled but tight. Gas station attendant in Sausalito, Eddie replied. Reed's men showed your picture around with enough cash to jog his memory. Said a man matching your description bought cigarettes and asked about road conditions up to Marin County. Dex swore under his breath. Such a small detail, such an enormous consequence. There's worse news, Eddie continued, his thin fingers drumming once on the tabletop. They found Pete Romano last night, the night watchman at the cannery where you pulled Mrs. Blackwood from the bay. Someone worked him over pretty good before putting two in his chest. Lorelai's hand flew to her mouth. Because of me? Because Reed Blackwood doesn't like loose ends, Eddie corrected her gently. And because Pete was Silver's man. This isn't just about you anymore, Mrs. Blackwood. This is about territory now. Silver's not happy. Dex's expression hardened. What's Silver planning? Eddie's smile was thin and without humor. That depends on what you tell me next. He turned to Lorelai, his pale eyes suddenly intense. I need to know everything, Mrs. Blackwood. Every detail about Reed, about your husband's dealings, about the night they tried to kill you. If there's anything that could give Silver leverage, now's the time to share it. The city continued its business below them, oblivious to the life and death conversation taking place in the forgotten warehouse. Somewhere, Reed Blackwood was hunting. Somewhere, Sterling Silver Knox was calculating the value of loyalty against the cost of war. And in a small apartment above a warehouse, Lorelai Blackwood prepared to tell secrets that might save her life or end it. Eddie Mercer left shortly before dusk, pocketing his notebook with the meticulous notes he'd taken during Lorelai's 3-hour confession. His parting words offered little comfort. Silver will be in touch. Stay put. Stay alive. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed in the suddenly silent apartment. Lorelai sat at the kitchen table, emotionally drained. She'd told Eddie everything about Mason's gambling debts, about Reed's extortion, about the ledger she'd found hidden in Mason's study with names and figures that made no sense to her but that Reed had been desperate to recover. The ledger, Dex said, breaking the silence. He stood by the window, a cigarette burning between his fingers. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not just you escaping, but what you might know. I told Eddie the truth. I never saw the contents, Lorelai replied, rubbing her temples. Mason kept it in his desk. I only found it after he died, when I was looking for insurance papers. Reed showed up the next day, tore the place apart looking for it, but you'd already moved it. It wasn't a question, Lorelai nodded slowly. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was important, so I hid it. She gave a bitter laugh. For all the good it did me, they still came for me in the end. Dex took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the dimming light of the apartment. Where is it now? Safe deposit box at Pacific National, she said. The key is in my satchel, the one I had with me when you went into the bay, Dex finished. Smart thinking. Night fell over San Francisco, the streets below coming alive with neon and shadow. Dex made a simple dinner from the supplies in the refrigerator, eggs and bacon, toast with jam. They ate in companionable silence, the radio playing softly in the background, a crooner lamenting lost love. Tell me about Korea, Lorelai said suddenly, setting down her fork. You mentioned it at the cabin, that you were discharged. Dex's face closed off, the shutters coming down behind his eyes. Not much to tell. I just bared my soul to a stranger for 3 hours, she countered gently. Seems only fair you share something in return. For a long moment, Dex was silent, contemplating his plate. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured. I was a sniper, good one too. Until Heartbreak Ridge. He took a sip of his coffee, buying time. My spotter was hit. Bad. The kind of hit where you know he's not going home. He begged me to end it for him. Understanding dawned in Lorelai's eyes. And you did. Dex nodded once. Command didn't see it my way. Called it murder. Would have been worse than a dishonorable if my CO hadn't pulled some strings. Still, no parades when I came home. No benefits. No job waiting. So, you found Silver? Lorelai prompted. Other way around. I was drinking myself stupid at some dive bar in Oakland. 3 guys jumped me in the alley afterward. A ghost of a smile touched Dex's lips. I put 2 in the hospital. The 3rd turned out to be working for Silver. He was impressed enough to offer me a job. Doing what? Lorelai asked, though she suspected she already knew. At first, just muscle. Standing behind him, looking mean while he conducted business. Later. Dex shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. I had skills the business needed. The confession hung between them. Neither accusation nor apology, just truth. The first time, Lorelai said after a pause, her voice soft but steady, was 2 weeks after our wedding. Mason came home drunk, lost his temper because dinner was cold. Split my lip. Her hand rose unconsciously to her mouth, as if the wound were still fresh. I packed a bag that night, was going to leave. But he cried, said he'd never do it again, said it was the booze, not him. But it wasn't the last time, Dex said, his voice carefully neutral. Lorelai's laugh held no humor. They always say it's the last time. For 3 years. I believed him, made excuses. Wore high-necked dresses and learned how to cover bruises with makeup. She looked down at her hands, at the thin gold wedding band she still wore. By the time I stopped believing, I was too afraid to leave. Because of Reed, Dex guessed. She nodded. Mason was terrified of his brother. Said if I ever left, Reed would find me, make an example of me. Her eyes met Dex's, steady and clear. When Mason died, part of me was relieved. Thought I was finally free. Shows what I knew. Outside, a siren wailed, growing closer then fading into the distance. The city's nighttime symphony continued. Car horns, distant laughter, the rumble of trucks on the main road. We're quite a pair, Lorelai said with a sad smile. The soldier who showed mercy and the wife who couldn't save herself. Dex stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray. We're still breathing, he said simply. That counts for something. Later, as Lorelai prepared for bed, Dex made a makeshift pallet on the floor near the door. The apartment had only 1 bed, and without discussion, they both assumed it would be hers. You don't have to sleep on the floor, she said, emerging from the bathroom in borrowed pajamas. The bed is big enough. Dex looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Not a good idea. Because you don't trust yourself? Or because you don't trust me? The question was direct, without coyness or manipulation. Because you've had enough men making decisions about your body, Dex replied evenly. I won't be another one. Something shifted in Lorelai's face, surprise, followed by a deeper emotion Dex couldn't quite name. She crossed to where he sat and, after a moment's hesitation, placed her hand on his shoulder. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me. Not just the widow, or the victim, or the bargaining chip, just me. Her touch was warm through the fabric of his shirt, her fingers light but steady. Dex remained perfectly still, aware of her closeness, of the subtle scent of soap and something indefinably female. Get some sleep, Lorelai, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Tomorrow we find out if Silver thinks we're worth saving. She withdrew her hand and moved back to the bed, but the warmth of her touch lingered long after she had fallen asleep. Dex sat by the window, gun across his lap, watching the city below and listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Outside, San Francisco continued its nocturnal dance of light and shadow. Somewhere in the darkness, Reed Blackwood was plotting, Detective Chase was searching, and Silver Knox was weighing the value of lives against the cost of business. Morning would bring decisions none of them could escape. But for now, in the small island of light above the warehouse, there was only this moment of fragile peace, a soldier guarding a widow's sleep, both haunted by pasts they couldn't change, both hoping for a future neither dared imagine. Dawn broke over San Francisco, pale light filtering through the painted windows of the warehouse apartment. Dex had dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every unusual sound, his hand never far from his gun. The city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling down the streets, early workers shuffling to jobs, newspaper boys shouting headlines on corners. Lorelai was still asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand curled beneath her chin. In sleep, the tension left her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Dex turned away, uncomfortable with his own observation. He made coffee, the familiar ritual calming his nerves. No word from Eddie yet. No word from Silver. The waiting was always the worst part, the space between action where doubt could creep in. A sharp gasp from the bed made him turn. Lorelei was sitting bolt upright, eyes wide but unseeing, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "Water," she choked out, hands clawing at her throat. "Can't breathe water." Dex crossed the room in 3 strides, recognition dawning. He'd seen this before in men back from war, the nightmares that weren't just dreams but memories relived. She was back in the bay, drowning all over again. "Lorelei," he said firmly, crouching beside the bed but not touching her. "You're safe. You're in the warehouse. There's no water here." Her eyes found his, pupils dilated with terror. "Dex?" Her voice was small, childlike. "I'm right here." He kept his tone steady, reassuring. "You were dreaming, that's all." It felt so real. Her breathing was still too fast, her skin pale and clammy. "The handcuffs, the cold. I couldn't get to the surface." "But you did," Dex reminded her gently. "You fought. You survived." Lorelei shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "What if they find us? What if Reed?" "He won't." Dex's voice hardened with certainty. "Not while I'm here." She nodded, trying to believe him, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. The panic attack, for that's what it was, Dex recognized now, wasn't subsiding. "Look at me," he said, making a decision. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her cold hands in his. "Breathe with me." Slow and steady, he demonstrated, exaggerating his breathing so she could follow. Gradually, her breathing synchronized with his, her pulse slowing under his fingertips. The terror in her eyes receded, replaced by embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to withdraw her hands. Dex held on. "Don't apologize. Not for this." His voice was low, earnest. "What happened to you would break most people. But you're still fighting." Something in his words seemed to reach her. She squeezed his hands once before letting go, a silent acknowledgement. "Coffee smells good," she said, an obvious attempt to move past the moment of vulnerability. Dex accepted the change of subject. "There's enough for 2. Might help with the headache you're probably feeling." As they sat at the kitchen table, mugs steaming between them, Lorelei seemed to make a decision. "It's not just the drowning," she admitted. "In the nightmare, I see Mason too, and Reed. I see all the times I should have left but didn't. All the moments I wasn't brave enough." "Surviving isn't the same as not being brave," Dex countered. "Sometimes it takes more courage to endure than to run." "Is that what you did after Korea?" she asked. "Endured?" Dex stared into his coffee. "For a while. Then I stopped feeling much of anything. Makes the job easier. And now?" The question hung between them, delicate and dangerous. Before Dex could answer, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. 3 quick raps, then 2 slow eddies signal. Dex was on his feet instantly, gun drawn as he moved to the door. "It's me," Eddie's voice came through the wood. "Let me in, Stone. It's urgent." Dex unlocked the door, keeping his body between Eddie and Lorelei as the thin man slipped inside. Eddie's face was drawn, his normally impeccable suit rumpled as if he'd been wearing it all night. "Silver sent me," Eddie said without preamble. "They found Coughlin." Dex's expression hardened. "Dead?" "Not yet, but close. 2 of Reed's men worked him over last night, looking for information about you 2. Eddie glanced at Lorelei, who had risen from the table, her face pale but composed. Tommy at the bar overheard them say Reed knows about the ledger. He thinks Mrs. Blackwood can lead him to it. Coughlin wouldn't talk, Dex said with certainty. The Irish bartender had been one of Silver's most loyal associates for decades. "Not willingly," Eddie agreed grimly. "But they were. Persuasive." Lorelei pressed a hand to her mouth. "This is my fault." "No," Dex and Eddie said simultaneously. Eddie continued. "Reed Blackwood has been looking for an excuse to move against Silver for years. You're just convenient." "Silver wants you both moved," Eddie said, turning back to Dex. "Tonight. He's sending you up to the lake house in Tahoe until this blows over." "Blows over?" Dex's laugh was harsh. "Reed won't stop until he finds her. Or the ledger, which is why Silver wants to see it," Eddie replied smoothly. "Mrs. Blackwood mentioned a safety deposit box. Silver thinks whatever is in that ledger might be enough leverage to negotiate a truce." Lorelei's eyes widened. "You want me to get it? Now?" "But the police are looking for a woman matching your description," Eddie finished. "Which is why you'll need a disguise." He produced a small parcel from inside his jacket. Hair dye, glasses, different clothes. Should be enough to get you past the tellers, especially if you have ID. I have a key, but no ID, Lorelei said, taking the package with reluctant hands. Everything was in my apartment, which Reed's men have undoubtedly torn apart by now. Eddie smiled thinly. Silver anticipated that. He handed her an envelope. Driver's license, social security card, even a library card for one Elizabeth Collins. Should be enough to access your box. Dex didn't like it. The risk was too great, the margin for error too thin. But they were running out of options. Reed was closing in, and Silver's patience wouldn't last forever. I'll go with her, he said finally. Watch the door while she's inside. Eddie nodded. Car will be waiting in the loading bay at 3. Silver's sending Luca as driver. You'll have 20 minutes at the bank, then straight to Tahoe. He moved toward the door, then paused. Be careful, Stone. This is bigger than a widow with a grudge now. This is war. After Eddie left, Lorelei stood holding the package of disguise materials, her earlier panic replaced by a grim determination. I'll need to shower before I use this, she said, gesturing to the hair dye. Dex nodded, his mind already calculating angles, risks, escape routes. The soldier in him never truly retired. Dex, Lorelei said softly, thank you, for earlier, for seeing me through it. He met her eyes, allowing himself one unguarded moment. We'll get through this too, he promised. Together. Lorelei hardly recognized herself in the bathroom mirror. The expensive hair dye had transformed her raven locks to a honey blonde, and the glasses' simple tortoiseshell frames with plain glass lenses changed the shape of her face. The clothes Eddie had provided were nothing like her usual style. A modest blue dress, sensible shoes, a cardigan that made her look like a librarian or schoolteacher. Elizabeth Collins, a nobody, invisible, safe. What do you think? She asked, emerging from the bathroom. Convincing? Dex looked up from checking his gun and went still. For a moment, he simply stared, something unreadable passing across his face. You look, he began, then cleared his throat. Different. Good different. No one would recognize you. Lorelei smoothed the unfamiliar dress self-consciously. That's the idea. By 2:30, they were ready. Dex had changed into a dark suit, with a driver's cap pulled low over his eyes, less a disguise than a way to blend in, to become another anonymous man in a city full of them. His gun was holstered beneath his jacket, and a second, smaller pistol was strapped to his ankle. If anything feels wrong at the bank, we leave immediately, he instructed, checking his watch for the 3rd time. Don't argue, don't hesitate, just follow my lead. Lorelei nodded, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. The key to the safety deposit box felt impossibly heavy in her purse. Luca was waiting in the loading bay, as promised, a mountain of a man with surprisingly gentle hands on the steering wheel of the black Cadillac. He nodded to Dex but said nothing as they slid into the back seat. The city slipped past the tinted windows, busy streets. Shoppers, businessmen, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Lorelei pressed her fingers against the cool glass, suddenly aware of how far removed she was from that normality. Would she ever walk freely again, without looking over her shoulder? Almost there, Dex murmured, as the car turned onto Montgomery Street, the financial heart of San Francisco. Remember, calm and confident. You're just a woman accessing her box. Nothing unusual. Pacific National Bank rose before them, an imposing stone edifice with Greek columns flanking the entrance. Luca pulled to the curb half a block away, engine idling. 15 minutes, he grunted, his first word since their departure. Not a second more. Inside the bank, Lorelei's heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the hushed atmosphere of wealth and discretion. Dex walked beside her, close but not touching, his eyes constantly scanning the room. May I help you? The teller was young, blonde, with a practiced smile. I'd like to access my safety deposit box, please. Lorelei was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Elizabeth Collins. The process was smoother than she'd feared. The forged ID held up to casual scrutiny. The key worked. Soon, she was being led to a private room with the metal box that contained her future or her death sentence, depending on what it revealed. I'll be right outside, Dex said, taking up position by the door as the bank employee withdrew. Alone with the box, Lorelei took a deep breath before lifting the lid. Inside was exactly what she had placed there 3 weeks ago. The leather-bound ledger Mason had kept hidden for years. She opened it with trembling fingers. Page after page of names, dates, figures, delivery schedules, payment records, and something more sinister, locations of bodies, blackmail material, evidence of bribes paid to judges, police officers, city officials. Not just Reed's operations, but connections to other families, other cities. It was a roadmap of corruption, written in Mason's meticulous handwriting, a ledger of sins that could bring down not just Reed Blackwood, but half the organized crime in California. Lorelei closed the book, suddenly understanding why Reed had been so desperate to find it. This wasn't just about money or territory. This was survival. She slipped the ledger into her purse and rejoined Dex, giving him a small nod to indicate success. They walked out of the bank calmly, professionally, just another couple finishing their business. They were halfway to the car when Dex's hand suddenly gripped her elbow, his stride never breaking but his body tensing beside her. "Don't look now," he said, voice barely audible, but Detective Chase just pulled up across the street. Lorelei's heart stuttered. "Does he see us?" "Not yet. Keep walking. Normal pace." Dex's fingers tightened fractionally on her arm. "Laugh like I just said something amusing." She forced a laugh that sounded brittle to her own ears, but natural enough to anyone watching. They were 3 car lengths from Luca when Detective Chase emerged from his vehicle, lighting a cigarette as his gaze swept the street. "He's going to see us," Lorelei whispered, panic rising in her throat. Dex made a split-second decision. He pulled her into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, positioning his body to shield her from the street. Before she could question him, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The world narrowed to a single point of contact, his lips on hers, gentle but insistent, creating the perfect tableau of lovers stealing a moment. Through her eyelashes, Lorelei could see Chase pass by on the opposite sidewalk, his gaze sliding over them without interest or recognition. The kiss should have ended then. It had served its purpose. But something shifted between them, a current that had been building since that night in the cabin suddenly finding its circuit completed. Dex's hands softened against her face, and Lorelei found herself responding, her body leaning into his, her fingers curling into the lapels of his jacket. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. Surprise flickered in Dex's eyes, followed by something deeper, more primal. For a moment, they were not fugitives or victims or killers, just a man and a woman, discovering each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. "He's gone," Dex said, his voice rougher than usual. "We should move," Lorelei nodded, unable to trust her voice. They made it to the car without further incident, sliding into the back seat as Luca pulled smoothly into traffic. "Any problems?" the big man asked, eyes meeting Dex's in the rearview mirror. "Close call with Detective Chase," Dex replied, his professional demeanor firmly back in place. "But we're clear. Got what we came for." Lorelei sat with the purse clutched in her lap, the weight of the ledger, and what it represented, suddenly overwhelming. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we get you to Tahoe," Dex said. "Silver will want to see what's in that book before he makes any moves against Reed. And if it's not enough?" The question hung between them. "If Silver decides I'm not worth the trouble?" Dex's hand found hers in the space between them, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "That won't happen," he said, with a certainty that brooked no argument. "How can you be so sure?" Lorelei asked, searching his face. Dex met her gaze, the last of his professional distance falling away. "Because I won't let it," he said simply. "Whatever's in that ledger, whatever Silver decides, you're not going back to Reed. Not while I'm breathing." The declaration should have frightened her, its intensity, its finality, the way it placed Dex squarely in opposition to the forces that had ruled his life for 15 years. Instead, Lorelei felt something long frozen inside her begin to thaw. She squeezed his hand once, a silent acknowledgement of what had just passed between them. Outside, San Francisco receded behind them as they headed toward the Golden Gate, toward Tahoe, toward an uncertain future that somehow, improbably, held a glimmer of hope. In the front seat, Luca kept his eyes on the road, pretending not to notice the clasped hands of his passengers or the way they sat just a fraction closer than necessity required. The car carried them north, away from the city and its dangers, as afternoon sun bathed the hills in gold and shadow. For this brief moment, suspended between what had been and what would come, there was only the rhythm of the road, the warmth of joined hands, and the quiet understanding that everything had changed. Lake Tahoe sprawled blue and vast beneath the setting sun, its waters reflecting the surrounding pines in perfect symmetry. Silver Knox's lake house was less a house than an estate, a sprawling wooden mansion set back from the shore, with a private dock and boathouse, surrounded by enough land to ensure privacy and security. Luca drove through iron gates that opened automatically at their approach, up a winding gravel drive flanked by towering trees. 3 men with visible shoulder holsters watched their arrival from strategic positions around the property. "Silver's not taking any chances," Dex observed quietly. "Can you blame him?" Lorelei clutched her purse tighter, the ledger inside suddenly feeling like a live grenade. The car came to a stop at the front entrance, where Eddie Mercer waited on the steps, his thin frame silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the open door. "You made good time," he said as they exited the vehicle. His sharp eyes noted their still-clasped hands before they separated, but he made no comment. Silver's waiting in the study. The interior of the lake house matched its impressive exterior vaulted ceilings, stone fireplaces, walls lined with books and hunting trophies. The air smelled of pine, leather, and cigar smoke. It was a masculine space, unapologetically luxurious, built to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Sterling silver knocks rose from behind a massive desk as they entered the wood-paneled study. Despite his 65 years, he stood straight and tall, his silver hair cropped close to his skull, his tailored suit impeccable. The nickname came not just from his hair, but from the silver-headed cane he leaned on, slightly a souvenir from a bullet to the hip in his younger days. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice cultured, almost gentle. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." His gaze shifted to Dex, a flicker of something disappointment, concern, crossing his features. "Stone. You look like hell." "Been a long few days, Silver," Dex replied evenly. Silver gestured to the chairs arranged before the desk. "Please, sit. Eddie tells me you were successful at the bank." Lorelei perched on the edge of the leather chair, her back straight, her borrowed dress suddenly feeling like a flimsy disguise under Silver's penetrating gaze. She removed the ledger from her purse and placed it on the desk between them. "My husband's records," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everything Reed has been looking for." Silver made no move to touch it. "And what exactly does it contain that has my rival willing to start a war over it?" "Names," Lorelei answered. "Dates, accounts, evidence of bribes, locations of bodies." She swallowed hard. "Mason documented everything. It was his insurance policy, I think. His protection against Reed. Fat lot of good it did him," Silver observed dryly. "Mason didn't know how to use leverage," Lorelei countered. "I do." A flicker of surprise, followed by respect, crossed Silver's weathered face. He opened the ledger, scanning the first few pages with practiced efficiency. His expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened with each turn of the page. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, closing the book. "Enough to put Reed away for multiple lifetimes. Enough to bring down half the police force in San Francisco." He leaned back in his chair, studying Lorelei. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Blackwood?" "Protection," she answered without hesitation. "A new identity. Enough money to start over somewhere Reed can never find me." She took a deep breath. "In exchange, you get the ledger. Use it however you want against Reed." Silver's gaze shifted to Dex. "And what about you, Stone? Where do you fit in this arrangement?" The question hung in the air, loaded with unspoken implications. Dex held Silver's gaze. 15 years of loyalty balanced against a week of transformation. "I go where she goes," he said finally. "If that's acceptable." Silence descended on the study. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with increasing urgency. Eddie shifted uncomfortably by the door. 15 years, Silver said quietly. "That's how long you've been my right hand, Stone, my most trusted enforcer." He tapped the silver head of his cane thoughtfully. "And now you're willing to throw it all away for a woman you've known less than a week?" "Not throwing anything away," Dex replied evenly. "Just making a choice." Silver studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Very well. I'll need time to review the ledger, make arrangements. In the meantime, you'll both stay here where it's safe." Relief washed over Lorelei's face. "Thank you," she said softly. Silver waved away her gratitude. "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Blackwood. Reed is still out there, and he's not the type to give up easily." As if on cue, Eddie's phone rang. He answered, his face growing increasingly grave with each passing second. "Sir," he said, hanging up and turning to Silver. "That was Benny at the gate. 3 cars just pulled up outside the perimeter, men with guns." Silver's expression hardened. "It seems Reed is more resourceful than I gave him credit for." He pressed a button on his desk. "Security Protocol Alpha." "Now, to Dex," he added. "Get Mrs. Blackwood to the boathouse. There's a tunnel that leads to a cove on the east side. Boats fueled and ready. You knew this might happen, Dex said, realization dawning. I prepare for every contingency, Silver replied calmly, opening a drawer and removing a polished revolver. It's how I've survived this long. The first gunshots echoed from the front of the property. Silver nodded to Eddie, who produced a key from his pocket. Tunnel entrance is behind the wine rack in the boathouse. This unlocks it. Go. Dex took Lorelai's arm, guiding her toward a side door as Silver and Eddie prepared to defend the main house. In the hallway, he paused long enough to retrieve a shotgun from a display case, checking that it was loaded with practiced efficiency. Stay close, he instructed, his voice calm despite the escalating sounds of gunfire outside. Don't stop for anything. Lorelai nodded, her earlier fear now replaced with a grim determination. I won't slow you down, she promised. They slipped out a service entrance at the back of the house, keeping low as they sprinted across the manicured lawn toward the boathouse at the water's edge. Behind them, the night erupted in muzzle flashes and shouted orders as Silver's men engaged the invaders. The lake stretched dark and infinite before them, the mountains rising like sentinels against the star-strewn sky. Somewhere in that darkness lay escape if they could reach it in time. The boathouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the star-reflected waters of Lake Tahoe. Dex and Lorelai reached it breathless, the sounds of gunfire at the main house growing more intense behind them. Dex yanked the door open, ushering Lorelai inside before securing the lock. Find the wine rack, he instructed, his voice low and urgent. Eddie said the tunnel entrance is behind it. The interior was pitch black until Dex located a switch, flooding the space with dim yellow light. A sleek speedboat bobbed gently in the center slip, while fishing gear and maintenance equipment lined the walls. At the far end stood a modest wine rack filled with dusty bottles. Lorelai was already examining it, her fingers searching for a mechanism. There must be a lever or switch, she muttered. Dex joined her, running his hands along the wooden frame. Here, he said, finding a small depression beneath the bottom shelf. He pressed it, and with a soft click, the entire rack swung inward, revealing a narrow passageway carved into the rock. Silver thinks of everything, Lorelai whispered, peering into the darkness. Always has an escape route, Dex agreed, finding a flashlight hanging on a nearby hook. It's why he survived this long. The tunnel was damp and close, barely wide enough for them to walk single file. The sound of gunfire grew muffled, then faded entirely as they made their way deeper into the passage. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the smell of lake and stone enveloped them. How much farther? Lorelai asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Can't be much, Dex began, then froze as voices reached them from ahead rough, unfamiliar voices coming from what should have been their exit. Reed's men, he hissed, pulling Lorelai back. They've found the other end. How? Panic edged her whisper. How could they know about the tunnel? Someone talked, Dex replied grimly. Or Silver has a rat in his organization. He clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness. We need to go back. Try for the boat. They retreated in silence, feeling their way along the damp walls. When they reached the boathouse entrance, Dex pressed his ear to the hidden door, listening intently before easing it open a crack. Clear, he murmured, pulling Lorelai through. We'll take the boat. It's our only chance now. The firefight at the main house had intensified, providing unintentional cover for their escape. Dex helped Lorelai into the speedboat, then set about preparing it for launch, his movements swift and practiced. Do you know how to handle one of these? He asked, indicating the controls. She nodded. Mason had a boat, smaller than this, but similar. Good. If anything happens to me, head south along the shoreline. There's a marina about 5 miles down. Find a phone, call this number. He pressed a piece of paper into her hand. It's a friend. Someone outside the business. He'll help you. Lorelai clutched the paper, sudden dread washing over her. Don't talk like that. We're both getting out of here. Dex's hands stilled on the controls, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. Lorelai, he began, then stopped as the boathouse door splintered open. Reed Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, flanked by 2 gunmen. Unlike his brother Mason's nervous energy, Reed exuded cold confidence. His expensive suit was immaculate, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly combed. Only the gun in his manicured hand betrayed his true nature. Well, he said, his voice cultured and cruel. The widow Blackwood and Silver's attack dog. How convenient. Dex raised the shotgun in one fluid motion. But Reed's men already had their weapons trained on Lorelai. A standoff. 3 guns against 1, with Lorelei caught in the middle. "Put it down, Rivers," Reed ordered. "Or the lady gets ventilated." Dex hesitated, calculating odds, angles, possibilities. Lorelei stood frozen in the boat, her eyes locked with his, silently urging him not to surrender. "I said put it down." Reed barked, his composure slipping. "I've waited too long for this moment." With deliberate slowness, Dex lowered the shotgun to the dock. "Let her go, Reed," he said evenly. "It's the ledger you want." Reed's laugh held no humor. "Oh, I'll get the ledger, and I'll get the pleasure of watching you both die." He nodded to one of his men. "Check the boat. The ledger must be with them." As the gunman approached, Dex tensed, waiting for his opening. Lorelei saw it in his eyes, the decision, the acceptance of what must come next. "No," she whispered. The gunman reached the boat, roughly shoving Lorelei aside to search it. In that split second, Dex moved. He drove his shoulder into Reed, sending them both crashing into the second gunman. The shotgun skittered across the dock as all three men went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. "Run!" Dex shouted to Lorelei as he grappled with Reed, managing to slam the man's gun hand against the wooden planks until the weapon splashed into the lake. The second gunman was already recovering, raising his pistol. Dex saw it coming, knew he couldn't dodge in time. He locked eyes with Lorelei one last time, willing her to understand, to forgive him for what he was about to do. The gunshot echoed in the enclosed space, deafening in its finality, but it was not Dex who fell. Reed Blackwood staggered backward, a look of confusion crossing his face as a dark stain blossomed on his chest. He looked down at it with almost childlike bewilderment before collapsing onto the dock. Behind him stood Lorelei, the small pistol from the boat's emergency kit still extended in her shaking hands. She had never fired a gun before today. The first shot had been pure instinct, her body remembering Dex's brief lesson at the cabin. The remaining gunmen recovered quickly from their shock, swinging their weapons toward her. Dex didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, tackling one man off the dock into the frigid waters of Lake Tahoe. The second man fired wildly, bullets splintering wood around Lorelei. She ducked, scrambling for cover behind a storage locker as Dex and the gunman thrashed in the dark water below. A new voice cut through the chaos. "Drop it, now." Detective Warren Chase stood in the doorway, his service revolver trained on the remaining gunman. But unlike the corrupt officer they knew, Chase's eyes were clear, his stance professional. Behind him stood Silver Knox, leaning heavily on his cane, blood staining one sleeve of his expensive suit. The gunman hesitated, then let his weapon clatter to the dock. Chase moved in swiftly, kicking the gun into the water and cuffing the man with practiced efficiency. "Silver?" Lorelei looked from the mob boss to the detective in confusion. "Detective Chase and I have reached an understanding," Silver explained, his voice strained. "Amazing, what a ledger full of evidence can accomplish in the right hands." Lorelei's attention snapped back to the water, where Dex and the gunman had disappeared. "Dex!" she cried, rushing to the edge of the dock. For an agonizing moment, there was nothing but the gentle lap of waves against wood. Then a hand broke the surface, followed by Dex's head, gasping for air. He pulled himself onto the dock with the last of his strength, coughing up lake water. Lorelei fell to her knees beside him, hands moving frantically over his body, searching for wounds. "Are you hit? Dex, talk to me." He caught her hands, holding them still against his chest. "I'm okay," he managed between coughs. "The other guy, not so much." She helped him sit up, both of them soaked and shivering but alive. Across the dock, Reed Blackwood lay still, his unseeing eyes reflecting the stars above Lake Tahoe. The man who had terrorized Lorelei, who had ordered her death, who had pursued them relentlessly, was finally, irrevocably gone. "You shot him," Dex said quietly, a question in his voice. Lorelei nodded, the reality of what she'd done sinking in. "I couldn't let him hurt you." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not after everything you've done for me." Dex pulled her closer, uncaring of their audience, of the water dripping from his clothes, of anything but the miracle of her in his arms. "We saved each other," he murmured against her hair. Silver watched them with an inscrutable expression, leaning heavily on his silver-headed cane. Beside him, Detective Chase secured the handcuffed gunman, studiously avoiding looking at Reed's body. "The ledger," Silver said finally. "Where is it?" "Safe," Lorelei answered, not moving from Dex's embrace. "Where it will stay until our arrangement is finalized." A slow smile spread across Silver's weathered face. "You learn quickly, Mrs. Blackwood." He nodded once, an acknowledgement of respect. We'll discuss terms tomorrow. For tonight, I think we've all had enough excitement. As Silver and Chase led the prisoner away, Dex and Lorelei remained on the dock, the adrenaline of survival gradually giving way to exhaustion. Above them, the night sky glittered with stars, their light reflected in the now calm waters of Lake Tahoe. The lake had witnessed violence and death tonight, but it had also witnessed something rarer, more precious, rebirth. What happens now? Lorelei asked softly. Dex looked down at her, his hand gently brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. Now, he said, we start living. Dawn broke over Lake Tahoe, painting the water in shades of gold and rose. The night's violence seemed like a fevered dream in the clear morning light, but the evidence remained bullet holes in the boathouse walls, bloodstains on the dock, and the haunted look in Lorelei's eyes as she sat wrapped in a blanket on the mansion's stone terrace. Dex watched her from the doorway, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. She had barely spoken since they'd returned to the main house, since Silver's men had removed Reed's body and Detective Chase had taken formal statements from everyone involved. The official story, self-defense during an attempted kidnapping, was close enough to the truth to hold water. Coffee? Dex offered, crossing to her side. She accepted the mug with a grateful nod, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Any news? Chase left about an hour ago. Silver's in his study with Eddie, making calls. Dex settled into the chair beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. The official story is already taking shape. Reed Blackwood, crime boss, killed in a failed attempt to eliminate a business rival. And me? Lorelei's voice was steady despite her pallor. What happens to Mason Blackwood's widow? That depends on what you want, Dex replied carefully. Silver has connections. New identity, new city, new start, it's all possible. She stared out at the lake, its surface now placid and innocent. I killed a man last night, she said, her voice barely audible. I pulled the trigger and watched him die. To save my life, Dex reminded her gently. And your own. Does that make it easier? She turned to face him fully, searching his eyes for the truth. All the triggers you've pulled. Does knowing why make it easier? Dex considered his answer, owing her the honesty she deserved. No, he said finally. It doesn't get easier. You just learn to live with it, to remember why, and hope the reasons were good enough. She nodded slowly, accepting his answer. I don't regret it, she admitted. That's what scares me the most. If he was standing there again, threatening you, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. That's what survival looks like, Lorelei. Dex reached out, covering her hand with his own. It's not pretty, it's not clean, but it's real. The glass doors to the terrace slid open, interrupting their moment. Silver Knox stepped out, leaning more heavily on his cane than usual. The gunshot wound to his arm had been bandaged, but the night's exertions had clearly taken their toll on the older man. Mrs. Blackwood, he greeted Lorelei with a nod. How are you holding up? I've been better, she replied with remarkable composure. But I'm alive, thanks in part to your preparations. Silver's smile was thin but genuine. Paranoia is an occupational hazard in my line of work, one that paid dividends last night. He lowered himself carefully into a chair facing them. We need to discuss your future, both of you. Dex straightened slightly. You've made a decision? Several. Silver removed an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table between them. First, Mrs. Blackwood. Inside you'll find documentation for Elizabeth Collins, a complete identity. Bank accounts, driver's license, social security card, birth certificate. Everything you need to start fresh. Lorelei eyed the envelope but didn't touch it. And the ledger? Remains your insurance policy, Silver acknowledged, though I would appreciate continued access to certain pertinent information. In return, I guarantee your safety and financial security. What about Detective Chase? Dex asked. Can he be trusted? Chase has his own demons, Silver replied cryptically. Let's just say the ledger contained enough evidence of his colleague's corruption to ensure his cooperation. He's more valuable to me clean than dirty. Lorelei finally reached for the envelope, her fingers tracing its sealed edge. And what about Dex? She asked, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her shoulders. What happens to him? Silver's gaze shifted to his longtime enforcer, something like fondness briefly softening his weathered features. That's a more complicated question. He leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. 15 years is a long time, Stone. You've been more than an employee. You've been family. I know, Dex acknowledged quietly. Which is why this pains me, Silver continued. You're a liability now. Reed's people will be looking for revenge. His suppliers, his customers, they'll all want blood for what happened here. Lorelei's hand found Dex's, gripping it tightly. It was my bullet that killed Reed. But it was Stone who brought you into our world, Silver countered without heat. The result is the same. So what are you saying? Dex's voice remained calm, but his body had tensed, ready for whatever came next. Silver studied them both for a long moment. I'm saying it's time for Dex Stone Rivers to disappear. He reached into his jacket again, producing a second envelope. Inside is everything you need to become someone else. Someone with no connection to me, to Reed, to any of this. Dex stared at the envelope, understanding dawning. You're letting me go. With conditions, Silver added quickly. You never return to San Francisco. You never contact anyone from your old life. As far as the world is concerned, Stone Rivers died in that boathouse last night. And if I refuse? Dex asked, though they all knew he wouldn't. Silver's smile held no humor. Then we have a different conversation, one that ends much less pleasantly. He rose with effort, placing the second envelope beside the first. You have until noon to decide. The boat is fueled and ready. Eddie will provide whatever else you need. As Silver moved to leave, Lorelei found her voice. Why are you doing this? Why not just... She couldn't finish the thought. Silver paused at the terrace door, looking back at them with tired eyes. Because contrary to popular belief, Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not a monster. And because in 15 years, Stone has never asked me for anything. His gaze shifted to Dex, until he asked me to protect you. After Silver departed, silence fell between them, heavy with possibility and fear. The envelopes sat on the table like twin detonators, each containing the power to completely transform their lives. You could stay, Lorelei said finally, breaking the silence. Silver values loyalty. He'd protect you. Dex shook his head slowly. No, he's right. I'm a liability now. And Silver doesn't keep liabilities around, no matter how loyal. He picked up his envelope, weighing it in his hand. Besides, I made my choice when I pulled you from the bay. Everything since has just been following through. And what choice was that? Lorelei asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dex met her gaze directly, allowing her to see what he'd kept hidden for so long. To live like a man instead of a weapon, he said simply. To be worthy of the second chance I never thought I'd get. Lorelei's breath caught in her throat. She reached for her own envelope, their fingers brushing as she picked it up. So we disappear? She said, more statement than question. Together? Dex asked, the single word containing a universe of uncertainty. Lorelei looked out at the lake, at the mountains beyond, at the endless sky that promised freedom, then back to the man who had saved her life and, in doing so, had somehow saved his own. Together, she confirmed, her voice steady with newfound certainty. If you'll have me, Dex's response was to take her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers in silent promise. Above them, clouds drifted across the blue expanse of morning sky. Below, the lake shimmered with light and possibility. By noon, they would be gone, leaving behind their old selves like snakeskins shed in the wilderness. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but one they would face as they had faced Reed Blackwood's bullets side by side, stronger together than they ever could have been apart. 6 months later, a small bungalow stood nestled among the pines on the Oregon coast, its weathered cedar siding and blue trim blending with the natural landscape. Wind chimes tinkled from the covered porch, and smoke curled from the Riverstone chimney into the crisp autumn air. Inside, Daniel West, formerly Dex Rivers, stacked firewood beside the hearth, his movements economical and precise. The cabin was modest but comfortable, with wide windows facing the Pacific and simple, sturdy furniture. Books lined the shelves, many bearing the telltale creases of frequent reading. A chess set sat on a side table, a game in progress. The door opened, admitting a gust of salt-tinged air, and Elizabeth West, once Lorelei Blackwood, her arms laden with groceries from the small town 10 miles down the coast. Need a hand? Daniel asked, rising to help her. I've got it, she replied with a smile, crossing to the kitchen. Her hair had grown out to its natural color, a rich chestnut that caught the afternoon light. The glasses she wore now were prescription, not disguise, and laugh lines had begun to form at the corners of her eyes. Mrs. Abernathy says the storm coming in tonight will be a big one. Good night to stay in, Daniel commented, following her to help unpack the bags. His face had softened over the months, the constant vigilance easing from his features. A short beard now covered his jaw, and his hair had grown longer, curling slightly at his collar. He looked younger somehow, unburdened. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who had learned each other's rhythms, their domesticity all the more precious for its unexpectedness. The bungalow had become their sanctuary, a place where nightmares gradually lost their power, where past sins could be acknowledged without defining the future. "Letter came," Daniel said, nodding toward an envelope on the counter. "From Silver." Elizabeth paused in her unpacking. The envelopes came quarterly, always through a maze of redirections that made them impossible to trace, always containing news, money, and the tacit reassurance that their secret remained safe. "What does he say?" she asked, resuming her task with deliberate casualness. "Reed's organization has collapsed. Territory split between Silver and the Antonelli family from Chicago." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Detective Chase has been promoted to captain, and the ledger remains secure." Elizabeth nodded, absorbing the information. The ledger, or rather, microfilm containing its contents, was now sealed in a safety deposit box in Seattle, under yet another name. Their insurance policy, their leverage, their tether to a world they had left behind but could never completely escape. "He also says Eddie's getting married," Daniel added with a hint of amusement. "Some showgirl from the Starlight Club." "Good for Eddie," Elizabeth said, smiling despite herself. "Everyone deserves a chance at happiness." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with meaning. They had created a life here quiet, ordinary, precious in its normalcy. Daniel had found work as a security consultant for a shipping company in Portland, his military and private sector experience proving valuable without requiring detailed explanations. Elizabeth taught piano to local children 3 afternoons a week, her father's early lessons finally bearing fruit. They had married in a civil ceremony 2 months after arriving in Oregon, the simple gold bands on their fingers marking not just their commitment to each other, but to the new lives they had chosen. Elizabeth West and Daniel West, unremarkable names for remarkable survivors. But the past was never truly gone. It lived in Elizabeth's flinch at unexpected sounds, in Daniel's habit of checking exits whenever they entered a room, in the gun he still kept in the bedside drawer despite the peaceful coastal town's low crime rate. It lived in the nightmares that sometimes woke them both. Elizabeth gasping for air as phantom waters closed over her head, Daniel reliving firefights from Korea that merged seamlessly with the shootout at the boathouse. On those nights, they held each other in the darkness, offering wordless comfort, bearing witness to each other's ghosts without judgment or fear. Healing not by forgetting, but by remembering together. As evening approached, the promised storm began to gather offshore, gray clouds massing on the horizon. They ate dinner by the fireplace, sharing stories from their day, building layer upon layer of ordinary moments to form the foundation of their new life. Later, as wind began to lash the windows and rain drummed against the roof, Elizabeth stood at the bedroom doorway, watching Daniel bank the fire for the night. The warm glow illuminated the silver at his temples, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both hardship and joy. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. The excitement, the power. Daniel straightened, considering her question with the thoughtfulness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not the violence, not the fear, but the clarity, maybe, knowing exactly who I was and what was expected of me." He crossed to her, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "But I've never once regretted leaving it behind." Elizabeth leaned into his touch, her eyes holding his. Outside, the storm raged, powerful and primal. Inside, another kind of elemental force existed between them, the connection forged in danger and cemented in choice. "Come to bed," she whispered, her hand finding his. In their bedroom, rain lashing against the windows like memories they couldn't quite escape, Elizabeth stood before him in the soft lamplight. Her fingers moved to the buttons of her blouse, deliberate and unhurried. One by one they came undone, revealing the smooth skin beneath, the scars that told her story. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "If I undress?" The words echoed across time, back to that night in the safe house, when she had offered her body as currency, as the only power she believed she possessed. But this time, the question held a different meaning. Not transaction but gift, not desperation but choice. Daniel stepped forward, his hands covering hers on the last button. "I'll stay," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of this. Because of you. Because of us." He bent to kiss her, gentle at first, then with the urgency of people who knew too well how quickly life could be snatched away. They came together not in payment or obligation, but in the pure alchemy of desire and trust, need and fulfillment. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, the storm finally beginning to abate outside their window, Elizabeth traced the scars on Daniel's chest roadmaps of the life he had led before her. "Do you think we've earned this?" she asked, her voice drowsy with contentment. "This second chance?" Daniel considered the question, his hand stroking the length of her spine. "I don't know about earned," he said finally, "but I know we've paid for it. And I know I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it was worth the price." She settled against his chest, her breathing gradually slowing as sleep claimed her. Daniel remained awake a while longer, listening to the retreating storm, to the distant crash of waves against the shore, to the quiet miracle of Elizabeth's heartbeat against his own. In San Francisco, they had been Dex Rivers and Lorelei Blackwood, a mob enforcer and a desperate widow, thrown together by violence and need. Here, they were Daniel and Elizabeth West, husband and wife. Survivors, ordinary people building an extraordinary connection from the wreckage of their former lives. Outside, the storm clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moon above the Pacific. Its light spilled through the window, silvering the room and the two people who had found in each other not just salvation, but something rarer still, the courage to begin again. Dawn would bring another day of their new life, simple, precious, hard-won, another day of choices that affirmed what they had discovered in those desperate hours by the bay. That even the darkest waters could deliver you to unexpected shores. That sometimes, salvation came in the form of a hand reaching into the depths. That love, real love, wasn't a transaction but a transformation. That sometimes, the most important question wasn't about staying or leaving, but about becoming who you were always meant to be.